and welcome to Stop Now, a social experiment enterprise where we stop, listen, and share. Welcome back, everyone. I am Nate, one of your hosts here at Stop Now, and it is great to be talking to you again this week for what I'm sure is going to be an enlightening and fun conversation, or as fun as it can be around the subjects that we're going to get into. But I'm not alone. Of course, we have Amer with us. Amer, how are you?
Annette, good morning. I'm good. Thank you.
Yes, good to see you as always, Amer. Happy New Year, because I don't think we've
Happy New Year.
talked since the New Year. So it's good to see you again, buddy. And of course, we are joined by the man in the mask, the voice of the voiceless, the man behind the curtain, keeping things moving here. JK. JK is with us. How are you?
I'm good, Nate. Thank you.
Good to have you here, JK. And of course, as I mentioned, we do have a very special guest this week. He is joining us from the Anti-Human Trafficking Initiative. I had to look down at my notes to make sure I got all the names correctly in the places that they were supposed to be. But I'm so happy to bring Adam Zarnowski to the program this week. So Adam, thank you so much for your time, sir. Can you start off just maybe by telling us and the viewers a little bit about what you are, a little bit about what the organization is and the work that you do?
Yes, well, thank you, Nate, for having me. My name is Adam Zarnowski. I serve as the Open Source Intelligence and Investigations Manager for the Anti-Human Trafficking Intelligence Initiative. And what we do is leverage data and information to identify victims and perpetrators of human trafficking and get the victims' resources and bring the bad guys to justice.
And obviously, this is something that is very near and dear to us here at Stop Now, Adam. You know, we've been talking about this issue of human trafficking and labor trafficking and sex trafficking and child trafficking for years now. And of course, as anybody that has watched our shows knows, January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. So we do always want to put an extra special, spotlight on this issue during the month of January. What was it that got you involved in this cause, Adam?
Oh boy, that's a long story. I was 16 and I stumbled upon this issue. And I got the way I was never a victim. I need to make that clear. I am not a survivor. But I found out this was happening in basically they were advertised as tough love boot camps at the time, and the things that were happening was just so horrible. And so I just started making myself available to assist with the help the survivors out, and I sort of developed a reputation for investigations along the route. And I've served as a federal officer. Since then, I've done a lot of things, and now I'm with ATII, which is probably the most effective organization I've ever been with for addressing this issue.
Adam, we talk a lot on this show about survivors, how victims can go from surviving to thriving in the process, following something like this. What are some of the things that you've seen, through your work over the years, and just some of the good stories? Because we talk a lot about the bad stories and the horrible things that these folks have to go through. But what are some of the stories that give you hope?
Because like you said, there are a lot of people still struggling out there. In fact, some new data just dropped from Polaris showing how badly survivors struggle after escaping. But this one young man, I'll never forget him. He was trafficked from Africa over here by a woman who brought him over as her husband, and just horribly sex trafficked him. And it's one thing we don't discuss enough about are the men who are sex trafficked.
Mm.
And we got him out, and he became a certified truck driver, and he's just thriving.
Mm.
And I mean, it's really incredible. And I'll never forget, he every time I went to work with him, he'd fix me his traditional food from Africa, and it was the greatest experience I could ever ask for, because it was really good food. um and it was like, you're sharing this with me. This is incredible. This is just such a wonderful experience.
Mm.
But yeah, he's doing great. I mean, he's making more money than I am now. So I mean, you can't ask for a better outcome than that.
Absolutely not. And then I love that you kind of put a spotlight on there right there, Adam, in terms of a lot of times when people think about human trafficking, they think about what they see in the movies or on TV, and it's deeper than that. You know, it's men, it's women, it's boys, it's girls, it's people from all different backgrounds and different countries. And so part of what we try to do here is raise awareness and educate folks that this isn't like the movies. You know, this isn't
No.
Liam Neeson and Taken. You know,
Yeah.
it's bigger than that. So what are some of the things that you think folks should know about this issue?
It can certainly happen to anyone, but there are certain trends that we need to pay attention to, especially when it comes to people from impoverished backgrounds. In the United States, persons of color and especially indigenous persons are particularly vulnerable to human trafficking. And like you're saying, everybody has this perspective of Liam Neeson from Taken, where trafficking victims are kidnapped and forced into slavery. That's not exactly how it works. However, when we're talking about human trafficking victims from indigenous reservations, yeah, that is exactly how it works. Especially the indigenous women, they are literally kidnapped and sold into prostitution. And we need to do, I mean, we don't even, the United States government doesn't even keep track of how many indigenous women go missing. And so that's something we really need to pay more attention to. We need to start thinking in terms of vulnerability. And this is something where social justice has gotten a bad rep because of politics lately, but it really is a matter of social justice. Poverty, homelessness, racial justice. It's really, if you want to address human trafficking, you have to address those root causes that make people vulnerable. That's the key to this whole thing.
Yeah, and not to cut you off, Adam, but I think you're right. Like a lot of what folks would maybe categorize as quote unquote social justice has been politicized. But
yeah,
it's like, just think about if that were your child in that situation,
exactly.
regardless of what race you come from, what background you come from. Like, I feel like everybody has the same hopes and dreams for their kids. And so like if this kid over here who's not part of my family goes missing, that should affect me the same way as if it was my kid. You know, we should have that empathy, but I feel like you're right. Like a lot of times people get caught into I'm team red or I'm team blue, and I can't see the other side.
Exactly. And we have to come back to the concept of, as you said, what if this were your child? Because it is somebody's child at the end of the day. And that's what it really comes down to.
So I guess another part of this that we don't talk about as much on this show, because we do like to highlight the survivors and their stories and how they can help others who might be in those situations. But one thing I always wonder about when we have these conversations, Adam, is what is being done to prosecute or bring the perpetrators to justice? Like how, because we can talk about saving and helping survivors and victims on the back end, but how do we stop it from happening in the first place?
Yes. Yeah. That's a really good question. And from my perspective, the answer is simply not enough. And when you talk to survivors, they're the ones getting arrested. Because there's this aspect in trafficking known as forced criminality, whereas they're the ones having their identities stolen and used for all these extravagant purchases. When you talk to sex trafficking survivors, they're being told to get their Johns drunk and steal from them. And especially when the whole phenomena of street gangs can be examined from a trafficking perspective. It's forced criminality, where they don't really want to commit the crimes, but they're being forced to by their traffickers. And so most of the people being arrested, and I've seen some of the statistics, and they're appalling. Most of the people being arrested and charged are victims, not the perpetrators. And so the one thing I really advise everybody to be careful about is whenever you hear new legislation being brought forward to address human trafficking, listen to what the survivors are saying about it. Because typically, more often than not, it's criminalizing the survivor, not the trafficker.
So I think one of the things that you hit on right there, Adam, is kind of just this, even though you're in a bad situation, because I've had friends growing up that were involved in gangs or, various things that they knew this probably wasn't the best thing for me, but what are my options? What are, maybe I've got a bad home life, or maybe the economics in my community aren't where they need to be, and this is the only thing. And obviously it's a little bit different when you talk about folks being trafficked, but do you run into people that find it hard to escape because they feel like there's no other way for them outside of that life?
Oh, yes. That's a very common problem, because and a lot of these people, they don't realize they're being trafficked. That's a common phenomenon, where you're talking to these people and it doesn't click with them. It doesn't click for some time until they're out of that life that, I didn't really have a choice here. I was literally a survivor. I was doing what I needed to do to survive. And modern trafficking, modern slavery is more psychological than it is anything. I remember a great quote by Harriet Tubman, who said, if I could have convinced more people they were slaves, I could have rescued thousands more. And she really hit the nail on the head way back then. People don't realize that they're being controlled, and it's a tragedy.
Are there things that you mentioned legislation? Are there things that the government, are there things that, the authorities, the police, are there things that, social workers can be doing more to not only help the survivors once they get out of that situation, but to maybe stop somebody from going down that path in the first place?
That's a really good question. We need to talk about, as a society, what healthy families and what healthy homes look like, especially how we treat children. Because if you talk to survivors, it's typically what they experienced in childhood. They tended to experience a lot of abuse in childhood, or they had parents who abused them. They had parents who exposed them to drugs. And this is the same for traffickers. It's the same phenomena that creates a survivor of human trafficking. Is the same phenomenon that often creates the traffickers,
Yes.
because this is how they were raised to survive.
Mhm.
I remember a pimp, he was brutally sexually assaulted by his family up until age 14, at which point he was made by his father to pimp out his sisters.
Mm.
And there's, what do you expect that kid to go on to do?
Mhm.
He's gonna continue to pimp out women. It's so we really need to have a conversation about how we treat kids, especially in the juvenile justice systems, the foster care system, which is just a revolving door for sex traffickers. The whole family law, CPS systems, those need to be drastically reformed.
Mm.
Just a quick question, Nate. Sorry
Yes.
to look at you, and I just want to jump in here. Like, I want to play the devil's advocate here. So I reached out, like, your organization is quite amazing. You guys are doing a great job. What attracted me is, like you mentioned it, like site itself is like follow money and fight slavery. So that itself, like, intrigued me, like, to question so many things, right? Because trafficking as an anti-trafficking movement, it's everybody does that, like, for a reason, right? So it's the simple reason is I want to make more money, and obviously we can only traffic humans. If you sell a product, like, it's just one-time profit, but with the humans you can continue to make profit by abusing them. So
Absolutely.
so this is not going to be eradicated, right? So it cannot be stopped. It's just like how we are using the term modern slavery. Slavery itself is a questionable thing, right? So we want somebody to be our slaves, to do our work. And that's a human mindset. So you when you say these things, like, what is wrong? Because it's $1 billion industry. We all know that. Then
Oh, it's much more. Yeah.
then why do we, like, shooting blanks in the dark and say that, like, this can be stopped? It looks foolish for me. So I'm just asking you that question.
Yeah. We really need to completely, this is just my personal opinion. I'm not speaking for any organization when I say this. We completely need to rewrite how we organize ourselves into societies. Because this is, it's not just the United States problem. It's not just a problem in Xinjiang, China. I mean, it's not just a capitalist versus communist problem. It's a human problem. I mean, we declared slavery over with in 1865, and then immediately established black codes and Jim Crow codes, so that we could just start it all over again. We really, I think a lot of it lies in neuroscience and psychology, and trying to adapt the human brain to our shortcomings. And it deals with bias. It deals with the heuristics that make us dehumanize one another. And how do you fight what's in your own head? That's the critical question, because it's in all of our heads. It's all of us. We all benefit from human slavery. I mean, the clothing I'm wearing, I mean, the headset you're wearing, it's all produced by slaves. And so we really need to have a conversation as a society as to where we want to be and where we actually are, not where we tell ourselves where we are. but an actual honest to goodness honesty hour.
To that point, Adam, because I do think JK brings up a really great point, because not to take the humanity out of this, but if you break it down to a business sense, you've got supply and demand. And so the traffickers, they're on the supply side, and we can do, things through legislation and through the authorities, like you said, to try to tamp down on that. But if we don't get rid of the demand, there's always going to be this thing that goes on. So do you feel like there's any way, you made the example of, the shoes we wear, the clothes we wear, the laptops we're on right now. Is there any way to kind of put that toothpaste back in the tube from the demand side?
That's a very good question. And from the demand side, we're not having a lot of success. I've read the studies, and they meet with some success, but the problem is just so huge. You can address demand all you want, and it just doesn't deal with it. What we really need to realize is that as societies, we're sort of more like addicts that are addicted to the goods produced by slavery. And then you've got dealers, and then you've got the addicts, and then you sort of got the dealers who are hooked on their own supply. And from there, you can start addressing not just the demand, but the supply. Because addressing the demand just isn't working. And there just isn't enough interest in addressing the supply yet. It seems to me not enough people are serious about addressing the supply.
And it's so ingrained, not to cut you off, Adam, but to your point earlier, like, say, for instance, I get rid of, and just throwing a name out there because all the companies do it, but let's say I get rid of all the Apple products in my home. I still have to go to work, and I bet you they're using Apple products, or they're using, products from somebody else who uses child labor or human labor. And so it's very hard to kind of extricate yourself from any company that is in bed with the traffickers, because it's so ingrained in everything.
It's impossible. I would say, if you drink coffee, if you eat chocolate, if you use sugar at all, those are all slave produced goods. It's impossible, especially when you start looking at the supply chains. And it's ridiculous. And it's really, like I said, it's a global phenomenon. And so what we have to have some sort of buy-in before we can address it. Because at this moment, I'm really not seeing the large scale buy-in from people. Everybody says they want to do something about human trafficking. Everybody says they want to do something about slavery. But when it comes to action, nobody actually wants to do anything. And it's very depressing at the minimum.
Yeah, I have a quick question to Adam.
There we go.
Trafficking is a common issue everywhere in the world. So how can we protect our child from getting kidnapped and trapped?
Okay, kidnapping is very rare because it attracts so much attention. The best thing I can suggest is stay involved in your kid's life. Know who they're talking to. Know especially who they're talking to online. And just rest assured that the odds of them getting kidnapped are very, very low. And the threat comes more from somebody you know and trust than it does from somebody picking them up off the street. That's part of the problem. We don't focus enough on the people we know and trust,
Mhm.
as opposed to this vast nebulous stranger danger that is easier to focus on, but it's not where the threat comes from. The threat typically comes from a child inside a child's own home.
Yeah, Adam, I just want to move past on generalizing it, right? So or categorizing it into child trafficking or kidnapped and forced. So some kind of, in whether it's sex trafficking or labor, in every other overall as a human trafficking initiative, right? So you want to, we as a society, as you mentioned, right? So everybody wants to say like, oh, I'm against it, like it has to be abolished. But when it comes to action, like what are we actually doing it? What interests me is like you guys provide some training programs, and can you talk about those things and how does that investigative intelligence piece works, and also creating that undercover profile? Those are very fascinating thing for me too, because we are trying to do that in our organization as well. So can you explain?
We provide multiple trainings throughout the year, and if you're interested in partaking in some of these trainings, please get in touch, further touch with us, and we can provide them. We just provided a very in-depth training as to how to, it's open source intelligence, which is basically finding information that's already out there, because there really is no privacy anymore. And when it comes to human trafficking, law enforcement really doesn't know what to look for. And I don't mean this disrespectfully for law enforcement. It's just law enforcement is not trained to look for this. A good friend of mine reviewed all the criminal justice literature, and human trafficking is only mentioned in maybe 2 or 3 books out of 500. And police, when they aren't trained on human trafficking, they're not trained to look for signs of coercion, forced fraud. They're trained to look for prostitution. And Dan Nash, he had some really remarkable statistics. I think it was about 83% of police officers rely on information they see from movies and television to fuel their understanding of human trafficking. So they're relying on movies like Taken to get their understanding of human trafficking, which is bad. But we also do, we host a dark webathon, which is coming up, where if you register, we train you on how to go onto the dark web and hunt for cyber criminals involved in human trafficking, particularly crimes against children.
I'm glad that you brought up that component, because as JK knows, one of my favorite guests that we have had from time to time here at Stop Now is a retired police officer, and he spent years in Atlanta and I believe Tennessee as a detective and as a police officer. And one of the things that he tells us all the time is police aren't being properly trained to deal with these types of situations. And from not only a psychological and emotional standpoint to be able to deal with these victims, but they're just like you said, they're trained to stop a crime from happening. And they're not trained to be a counselor. They're not trained to be able to empathize in that moment. And so that's one of the things he's been trying to introduce into law enforcement. And again, Adam, I feel like this is kind of one of those topics that can kind of get political when it doesn't need to be. When we talk about the law enforcement needs to change, and we've had an example this week of law enforcement needs to change, and it shouldn't be a red or blue issue. It should be everybody realizing, hey, like, we support the police, but there are some things that they are not trained to do and trained to handle. And so we shouldn't ask them to do these things. Maybe we should help them and train them and bring in other people that can help law enforcement with issues like this.
Exactly. And it's not so much an issue of line duty officers. It's the people at the top who don't want to implement this. I've talked to people at the DLJ, and it's like, yeah, we don't want to pursue that at this time. And I'm like, why not? You keep saying this is a huge issue, and I'm telling you how to fix it. And we're all telling you how to fix it. Your own officers are telling you how to fix it. And you're
Yeah.
saying not at this time. It's ridiculous.
If not now, then when?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting thing, right? Again, that is the reason, Adam, like I'm not convinced that like law enforcement or even Justice Department can solve this problem, right? Making legislation, it's not going to stop it, right? Even white collar crimes, right? Financial things, right? Big industries are trying to manipulate people, bring in people in visa and trap them in this human trafficking ring, and then just say that like, oh, we can't do anything about it. They volunteered it, they know the risk, they came and they got trapped. So either they leave the country or you can fight back as long as you have this potential to fight. So this is how I see this. So so help me out understand, like because we might be running out of time. Like I just want to ask so many questions. So how do you fight slavery or even fight against this anti-human trafficking thing when you follow the money, right? Because my question and concern, even victims, they don't come forward. As you said,
No, they don't.
anyone can become a victim. And even the people who have become victim, they don't want to make a complaint. They don't want like to fight it out because they want some solution, somebody to pay them and live their life or do something else, right?
Yeah. I mean, they want to live their lives and be left alone. Yes. And it's a very, it raises a lot of very philosophical questions. I'm glad you asked this question. I don't have a silver bullet. I wish I did. My philosophy is we cannot arrest our way out of this. And for my fellows in law enforcement, I get into arguments with them on this all the time. But we cannot simply arrest our way out of this, especially when you realize that more victims than perpetrators are being arrested. We have to address society's core issues, such as poverty, such as homelessness, such as inequality. And I'm not sure how we get the system to address that, because the system's designed to keep these very unequal systems running. In fact, it depends on it. And so we almost have to have some sort of revolution before we can even hope to completely eliminate slavery. But I don't know how that happens.
It's kind of like, and I'll let Amer ask any final questions he has here in a second, but it's kind of like, Adam, I was having a conversation with a friend the other day about just kind of America. And, you know, like the more things change, the more things stay the same. And I think one of the reasons that you get incremental changes here and there, but a lot of the same, like we're having a lot of the same arguments in 2023 that my parents had in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
And it's because the ingredients of America are still there. Like we got, you know, just for an example, we got marinara cheese, we got pepperonis, and we've got some Parmesan cheese, you know, in addition to the other
Sounds
cheese.
good.
And it's like, no matter how much I try to configure and change the dish, it's still going to have the same flavor, you know, at its core, because those are the same ingredients. And it feels like that inequality that you talk about, the economics of it all, Adam, unless we address that, not only when it comes to the issue of trafficking, but a lot of things in this country we're going to be in this cycle where we get better and then we get a little bit worse, then we get a little bit better, then we get worse again.
Yeah. I think you're right. We have to break the cycle, and we see this a lot in trafficking. I mean, it's cyclical. I mean, and it's we see these feedback loops.
Mhm.
And I see that as sort of where our country, as well as the larger world, is. They say those who don't learn from history are
Mhm.
destined to repeat it. And in my research, yeah, we're not learning from history. It's a tragic statement on the human condition.
Mm.
Yeah, there is a common word that Michigan is the hottest spot for human trafficking. Is that still true now?
I'd have to look at the data that statistic is coming from. I know depending on the source of the data, it gives various states, and some say California, some say Texas.
Mhm.
It really depends on how you're measuring it. Simply put, it's bad all over.
Yeah.
And quantitative data is particularly misleading as to the scope of human trafficking. We really need to do more research into the qualitative aspect. So, and that's where a lot of the more academic research is headed, is towards qualitative instead of mere numbers, because we lose a lot of the picture when we just look at mere numbers.
Mm. We definitely want to thank you for helping make the picture a little bit clearer for us
Well, I
this
hope I
week,
did.
Adam. And we'll definitely have to do a part 2, because I think
Yeah,
we've just kind of
definitely.
scratched the surface of this conversation. So we'd love to have you back down the road. But again, Adam Zarnowski from the Anti-Human Trafficking Initiative. Adam, any final thoughts, anything that you want to promote that you guys are doing? I know you mentioned the training earlier, the
Yeah.
website. Let the folks know.
We're having a dark webathon come up at the end of March, I believe. So if you head to followmoneyfightslavery.org, you can find the information on that, as well as all the trainings we're offering.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And again, followmoneyfightslavery.org is where the folks need to go for more information. And this will not be the last time we talk to you, but thank you for your time, Adam.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So for Adam, for JK, for Amer, I am Nate. I hope everyone was enlightened by this conversation. And we'll definitely have to do it again in the near future. If you would like to become a part of the solution, head to stop-now.org for more information about how you can join up with us on our mission. But until then, in the words of JK, bye for now.